Hi, everyone. Welcome to Next to Media. I'm Mike Shields. I'm here with Sir Martin Sorrell. He's the founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital. Hey, Sir Martin. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you.
So let's start out a little bit big picture. How do you assess the state of the ad market? In general, the forecasts look pretty good, but the growth has kind of been uneven. It's been very focused on retail media and CTV. Other sectors, not so much. And you've got, a lot of uncertainty in the world. How do you state?
Well, I'd agree that there is growth there. I'd agree that the growth has been uneven, but not for the reasons you just said. I mean, there's sort of a tale of two cities. There's a digital city, which is vibrant.
Right.
There's a traditional media city, which is under huge pressure. Was last year and continues to be. So if you look at the industry as a whole, it's about $1 trillion. Advertising revenues this year spent by clients will be about $1 trillion. Makes the arithmetic a bit easier. 700 billion or so of that, maybe a little bit less, is digital, right, and 300 billion, a little bit more, is traditional. Digital will be up this year by 10 or 15%. Has been for the first couple of quarters. We'll get into that. Traditional been down by 0 to 5, 5 to 10. Last year, traditional was down. If you didn't have live sports like Discovery Warner, you might be down as much as 10 or 15 in our revenues. If you had live sports like a Disney or a Fox, you were only down 0 to 5%. Be similar this year, I think, in terms of direction. Overall market up about 7, 8%, maybe even a little bit more. Now, those figures I gave you exclude mainland China, but they include the ByteDance TikTok revenues outside mainland China, including the US. But what's really interesting is to look at what's been happening by media seller. Biggest media seller in the world is Google, Alphabet, 25%, 250 billion this year, up from about 225 last year. Second will be Meta at 150 billion, up from about 125. Amazon will be 60, 61 versus 50 last year. People used to laugh when I said a few years ago to 100, it'd go to 100 billion, but it looks well on its way. Maybe in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, it'll be at 100 billion. So those are the three big Western ones. And then the three big Eastern ones, which the Chinese market of which is excluded from the number I gave you, the trillion. Yep. But Alibaba and Tencent, we don't have great data for the Chinese mainline market for them. But we know that ByteDance, or we think we know, is about 150 billion. Be same size as Meta this year, but 110 of that is coming from mainland China and 40 is coming from outside mainland China. And the US is probably about half that, maybe a little bit less than that. So it'll be about 20 in the US. And TikTok outside China has gone from 10 to 20 to almost 40 this year. So they've doubled up in over 2 years. What happens to them in the Supreme Court will be interesting. We'll see what happens there. But those 6 platforms are the dominant ones. And then beyond that, Microsoft is around 19 billion. It's up strongly now with obviously with Bing, with Activision Blizzard, with its investments in OpenAI and Mistral and G42. And then you have Apple at around 11 or 12 billion. That's not a disclosed number. It's a guess.
Yeah. And
then you have Snap at about 5.5, 6, Pinterest at about 4.5. Twitter used to be 5, probably now 1.5, 2. Now, maybe even less. And then Walmart probably around 3. Netflix trying to build its ad platform. Yep. Same with Disney as well. YouTube, of the 250 billion at Meta or at Alphabet or Google, probably YouTube is about 35, something like that. Having crossed 30, that's when Reed Hastings and Netflix thought having advertising might be a good idea. So that gives you an idea of what's been happening. So it's a vibrant digital marketplace, and it's a traditional marketplace that is under huge pressure.
It strikes me that it took you a long time to get through that list before you got to a company like Disney. You're not mentioning NBC Universal and Paramount and all these guys. It's just,
they're part of that 300 billion. I mean, they are part of the 700 billion as well, because the streamers
Right.
that are growing, which is obviously Netflix, which is doing about 30 billion in subscriptions. I don't know
Sure.
what its ad revenues are now. I would guess, I mean, I've heard targets of 3 billion, but maybe they're around about a billion. I don't know what Disney's generating from ads, or Amazon Prime from the out of their 60 this year or 50 last year, how much would come from advertising on Prime? I think relatively small, but growing,
Yeah.
and what Walmart figured out, they were doing it originally defensively against, you mentioned retail and CCTV, and that has been growing fast, but Walmart originally did it to be defensive against Amazon.
Yeah.
And they've found out that, that,
Hey, I
that
like
ad
this
revenue,
business. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I like it. It's pretty good, and it drops straight to the bottom line.
Right. Yeah. And you've seen them get a
So
lot more
it
aggressive.
is, where I started a few minutes ago, tale of two cities.
Yeah. What do you make of, it's very hard to read at least in the US, consumers are, people complain as if it's a bad economy, even though on paper it's pretty decent. They're spending. And then we've got this election that who knows what's going to happen. Can you read that market going into next year? Is it just impossible?
Well, I mean, nobody likes uncertainty. We had that election in the UK. We've got a budget coming up in the UK in a week or so's time. And there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And uncertainty is the enemy of investment. I mean, people don't like to invest, whether it's in ad budgets or in fixed capital equipment or software in an uncertain environment. But having said that, I think the American economy has been relatively vibrant and surprised people, to the upside, to the extent that, at the beginning of this year, people were worried that, the economy was going to soften and that the Fed and other central banks would be cutting early on the year. And of course, here we are at the end of the year and virtually the end of the year, and they haven't cut by very much.
Right.
If the terminal rate is 3.5%, we're still up in the fours and the fives. I mean, it's going to be different in Europe. The terminal rate will be lower in Europe than it will be in the US. But having said that, I think by and large, North America has surprised to the upside, maybe South America too, the Middle East and Asia. I mean, China is a bit of an enigma at the minute. But we'll have to see how that plays out. But by and large, I think that the world is a pretty dangerous place in the minute, what with US-China relations or the lack of them with Russia and Iran, those being the three big problems that we have. I think they're pretty impenetrable. So I think life is going to continue to be difficult. I think general economic growth for the next few years is not going to be where it was for the last 30 or 40 years because of that fragmentation that we're seeing, because of the geopolitical stuff. And that means picking your growth markets is the thing that you have to do. You have to be very, very circumspect and nuanced about, it's not like Ted Levitt's Consumers in 1983. He wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review, famous Harvard Business School marketing professor, saying consumers will consume everything in the same way everywhere. Well, those days I think have gone. I think we'll still grow. I think the world will grow still at, around 3%, maybe a little less, whereas it used to grow by maybe more. And I think inflation is a bit more structural than people give it credit for, to wit the difficulty the central banks have had getting inflation down. So we'll have more structural inflation, and therefore interest rates will be higher than we've been used to. So in that environment, coming back to your question, selecting the growth markets are really important. I think those markets are North and South America, the Middle East, not Africa because it's too volatile. Maybe in the longer term it will be. And Asia with a qualifier on China, because if you're big in China, do you really want to be bigger given the Taiwan risk? I don't think the Chinese will invade Taiwan, but that's non-negotiable from their point of view, so they will continue to squeeze it. And when we've sorted out the chip supply issue, and I think China will move on Taiwan in exactly the same way as they moved on Hong Kong, if you like. But that means that other markets such as India, if you have a big position in China, like an Apple, like a Tesla, like an LVMH, like a BMW, you may diversify your risk into India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Singapore. So, and then I left out Europe. I think Europe is slow growth. If the world's growing at 3, Europe probably grows less than 3. I think the UK have just revised their GDP forecast upwards to 1%. Big deal. I mean, China, question mark, is doing 5. That's been brought down to just over 4. But, I'd be delighted if the UK was doing 4. And the UK is $3 trillion GDP, and China is 18. So go figure. All right.
I guess the wild card is Trump. If Trump wins and has all these tariffs.
Well, wait, let me just finish off on Europe. I think, I think it's slow growth, and therefore efficiency and economy become really important. So AI, quantum computing, blockchain, metaverse, the overhyped metaverse, which I think is now underhyped, all those technologies become even more important in an efficiency context. So worldwide, you have to be more efficient. So coming back to your original question, I think we will have growth. It won't be as great as it was before, and there will be a need for greater efficiency everywhere, but particularly in Europe. On the question of the election, it's obviously a 50-50 election. If you push me against the wall, who do you think would win? I would say probably Trump. Trump seems to me to be not the favorite, but if you look at the betting markets and the stock market, until the last 24, 48 hours, I guess the market seemed to be betting quite heavily on Trump being elected. I mean, both presidents or potential presidents, the ex-president and the vice president, will be inflationary. I think probably Trump more so because of the tariff moves.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll have to see how it plays out. I think, although business doesn't like to say it, I think business favors Trump because he represents low tax, low regulation.
Yeah.
And I think from the business community, that is a positive. But of course, people focus a lot on the personalities.
Of course.
And some people like President Trump's personality, some people don't. And the reverse is also true. That some like Vice President Harris and some don't. So it's a very polarized nation. I mean, the UK election, it's good to ponder that result. I mean, Labour won by a landslide in terms of parliamentary seats. It's not a proportional representation system. It's a first past the post system. And they won with a huge majority, but only about 57 and 58% of the electorate voted. And of that 57, 58%, only 1/3, just over 1/3, 34% voted Labour. If you do the maths, that means that less than 20% of the UK electorate voted Labour. That's a highly volatile position. Right. And it may well be that we get a change after the first 5-year term. It may be that the Labour will stay in power for 2 terms. What's causing a problem in the UK at the moment is the budget and the uncertainty around whether taxes are going to be it's not whether taxes are going to rise, because they are going to rise, but the extent of where they will rise, and then the extent and control of public expenditure. So there are some uncertainties there. And I guess in an American context, people are also uncertain because the US nation is very polarized. I mean, last time around, I think the turnout is going to be critical in the case of Trump v. Harris. I mean, if women do come out and the voting registration seems to be indicating, the early registrations indicate that there's going to be a higher turnout this time than 2020. In theory, a higher turnout, more women would favor Kamala Harris on the abortion issue, in particular, Roe v. Wade. But we'll see. We'll see. So I would say, if you said to me, what do you think is going to happen? I would sort of guess Trump at this stage, a few days to go. But if the turnout is high and women come out in droves, then I think, you might get a different result. It's going to be very, very tight, as you know, in the
I wouldn't got my house on either way at this point.
Well, the betting the betting markets are certainly
I know, very much
betting on Trump, very much so. And the stock markets seem to be saying the same thing too.
Bringing it back down to our industry a little bit, you mentioned regulation and how things may or may not change. Do you have a take on the Google trial? Obviously, we're in this limbo period. There's a lot of anger from ad tech companies and publishers. I don't know if, are you rooting for either way, or have you been pissed off for a while? Do you and your clients care as much as some of the other parts of the industry?
Look, I gave you the structure of the industry. I mean, I think what is needed, in the absence of Armageddon, regulatory Armageddon, an AT&T or an Exxon, i.e. breakup, what you need is self-regulation. These companies, when you hit 3 trillion market cap, you're as big as, if you equate market cap to GDP,
you're
in theory, you're like as big as a country. These are countries. And it may well be that we'll see a $5 trillion dollar company, a market cap, or even 10 or 11. I saw articles saying 10 trillion. 10 trillion, if everybody else stood still, 10 trillion would be the third biggest country in the world after the US and China. So, these are big countries. 3 trillion, whether it's, Microsoft or Apple or Nvidia or indeed Saudi Aramco. I mean, these are as big as countries. I think it's unrealistic to believe that regulators can move as quickly, as these companies. They always move literally at light speed, and, they're moving extremely rapidly. And so I think regulators have to get close to these companies. I think there's also, there's that saying, Americans innovate, Chinese imitate, and the British regulate.
Right.
The EU regulates. I think it's bad for the UK to be, when we had our AI conference, the government had it at Bletchley Park and where the code breakers were during the war, the Second World War. And they made a virtue out of the fact that we were, signaling regulation. That was going to be our skill. I don't think that's really where we should put our energy. I think our energy should be, on building great commercial, AI or blockchain or metaverse or quantum computing companies. It should be on the technology or the regulation. But on the regulation, I think self-regulation, with power comes responsibility. I think actually Google, Alphabet did a great service, actually. I think they were slower than people thought they were going to be on bringing out LLMs.
Yeah.
I think they were worried about
they were conservative.
Yeah. They were conservative about hallucination. I think what triggered their move in the end was Microsoft's move on OpenAI, and Satya Nadella has done brilliantly in building a position from Microsoft from an AI perspective in particular. So I think I think big tech is really important, as we see in Ukraine, as we see in Israel and Gaza and Lebanon and Middle East. Big tech, the technology companies are super important from a defensive point of view, from a defense point of view, which we're spending more money on, and from an offensive point of view. So I think it's interesting. To my knowledge, I've been to China 2 or 3 times recently, and as far as I understand it, Alibaba is still virtually one company. You remember it was going to be split up after Jack Ma's comments on Ant Financial into 7 or 8 units. That has not happened. And I think one of the reasons for that is the Chinese government understands that, big tech is important to GDP growth, the economy, etc. So I think, you have to be a bit cautious on the regulatory front. And the best thing is to develop very close relationships with the big tech companies to help them. And the other thing is, I think these companies, whether we like it or not, the 6 platforms I mentioned, plus Apple, plus Microsoft, plus Nvidia, plus Musk, because you can't count him out, plus Adobe, Oracle, and Salesforce, to SAP, maybe IBM. I mean, these companies are going to be the ones, and they have the capital resources, both on compute and for energy, that are needed to develop AI models and LLMs in the future. So whether regulators like it or not, these big companies, that 3 trillion is going to be a bigger figure. It'll get to 4 or 5 trillion. So, I think you have to learn to live with these things.
Yeah. Speaking of learning to live with it, all of those companies you mentioned, or a lot of them, are developing their own AI ad buying tools that are not well understood. And there's a worry that they're going to almost take over the practice of executing media plans. And we're not going to be able to do much about that because they're the only ones that can build this stuff and fund it. Do you worry about that?
No, I don't. Look, AI is having an impact on visualization and copywriting.
Yep.
So it's reducing the time to market on ads. And there will be fewer copywriters and art directors as a result. It's massively increasing the ability to develop content at scale, but hyper-personalization scale, which will add to employment. On media planning and buying, I think you're right. There is no, that $1 trillion. Let's just think of that $1 trillion that was spent. Let's assume it was one client for a minute.
Right.
That $1 trillion, decisions on how you invest that, and it is investment, that $1 trillion in media planning and buying is something that is much better executed by an algorithm as it is investment management. No hedge fund that I'm sure that BlackRock and other fund managers, Vanguard and all these other, they allocate these things through algorithms.
Yeah. It's not interns clicking buttons. Yeah.
No, it's not 25-year-old media planners and buyers. I mean, the simple fact is, why is it that media planning and buying operations have 10,000 people? It's because the process is semi-automated,
right,
or manual, and they should be automated and driven by machinery. The outputs which these platforms produce are so sophisticated and good that the people, those planners and those buyers, at 25 or whatever, will be able to make much, much better informed decisions by having, Owen Gottlieb, I used to work with at Group M, which is still the biggest media planner and buyer in the world, used to say that it's not media planning and buying, it's media investment management. And he was dead right. It is about choosing the optimum distribution on a planned basis. It's exactly like making a decision between equities, bonds, properties, alternative investments. Exactly the same thing. And instead of making those decisions on whim, gut, insight,
relationship, whatever. Yeah.
Relationship, whatever. It's done. And by the way, there are a large number of markets. The Middle East is one. Japan is another, where there is not sufficient transparency in the media markets. People complain that the sort of digital supply chain is so complex. There's a lot of frictions in the system. Well, in theory, blockchain, which should enable us to establish a very close relationship between the media owner and the client in a much more sophisticated way. Now, as to the role of the agencies, my view is the role of the agencies will become much more aligned with the platforms, those 6 in particular that I mentioned to you before.
So they shouldn't build their own thing. They shouldn't try and counter them. Like, let's say a Group M, build their own AI buying tools.
They can build AI capabilities as we are at S4 and operating Brown Monks to evaluate, that can be real-time focus groups.
Right.
It can be media planning and buying techniques that use sophisticated AI applications. No, they should be doing that, but that's to enhance the performance and improvement. So we are validators for the platforms. We forge very close relationships with the platforms for that reason.
Last thing, catch us up on S4. It's still pretty early in this journey, but how have things changed?
It's been tough for us in the last couple of years because, half our business is tech, and the tech companies have been aligning their, they've been really focused on cost, Meta being the best example of that, or the biggest example. 2 years ago, Meta's stock was languishing at $80 or $90.
Right, a big correction.
And Wall Street really went on strike, because they were really worried about the spending on the metaverse and I think the beginnings of AI. And Mark Zuckerberg announced the year of efficiency, which is, I think, morphed into a couple of years of efficiency. Yeah. And his revenues have been going up by 20, 25%. and he's been reducing his advertising and marketing costs by 20%.
Right. So that hurts companies like you a little bit.
So he hasn't been, eating his own cooking, if you could put it that way. But efficiency wise, and you've seen that with not all tech companies, but it will come back. I mean, they've been putting all their money into AI. The biggest thing when you look at the quarterly earnings of Google and of Alphabet and Meta and Amazon and Microsoft and Nvidia and Apple is, how much are they spending on AI? And they're spending colossal amounts of capital expenditure. So, in a way, they probably are squeezing their OPEX and increasing their CAPEX.
Right. It's amazing. AI, Meta was supposed to be so screwed by the Apple changes, and somehow their AI
Meta is now 580, 550?
Yeah, it's worked out pretty well.
So it's gone from 80 to 90 to 550 literally in 2 years.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. All right, so Martin, we can talk forever, but I want to let you go here. Thanks so much for
Thank you very much. I hope that's a help.
It's perfect. Thank you.